School life.
Now remember,
don't jump in too quickly
right.
and say we're live. Because
don't tell us we're
there's
live
funny,
right away.
The funny thing that happens and it gets cut off.
Yeah, I mean, it's not this long, but yeah. But we are live now.
You boys. Us boys, eh?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? You should get some girls on here.
I had girls on here, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is the
189.
3, 4 boys we've had on here. And 2 girls. Anyway.
Hey, what's the name of the show, Anais?
Oh, yeah, I gotta start. Sorry. I was like, I don't know why I'm staring at Gerald for some reason here. Anyway, because he like keeps talking and pontificating, and I'm like, yes, fun facts. All right. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Anais.
I'm Gerald.
I'm Andy.
Okay.
Whoa.
And
Andy's fired up today.
I know. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yes. This week.
What do we read?
Yeah, I'm going to Andy. I can't say the thing.
I'm excited.
All right. So we read The Lost Performance of the High Priestess of the Temple of Horror by Carmen Maria Machado. And I feel like I need to say yes.
We didn't just read it this week, though, did we?
Yeah, we read it.
Oh, my goodness.
We read it for 2 weeks.
Well, yeah, we read it for 1 week. And then we very wisely, in my opinion, said, let's have another week to cool off and let's come back.
So I'd like to tell you guys a fun story before we even get into it.
Real quick, before you tell me this fun story, just in case, because I don't know what the story is. This story is extremely explicit. So if you're listening to this with children, don't. All right, Andy.
Don't.
Don't read it with children. It's not a kid's story.
So I was sitting with Karina, and she's like, oh, so what are you guys reading? And I said, this really long title story by Carmen Maria Machado. She's like, oh, I love Carmen Maria Machado. I was like, okay, I better read this story right away. Because by her reaction, I knew what was coming. It was one of these things. So then I read it last night. I knew it wasn't going to be just some fluffy little story like we've been doing. And then so I read it. And then you guys were like, oh, I'm sitting down to read the story now. I was like, oh. And then sure enough, you're like, I think I need another week to process what just happened. Like, yeah, you do, don't you, Anais?
I did. Because like normally we read a short story and I normally am up at like 8. So I have 4 hours to prep. It takes me like a half hour, usually 40 minutes, right? So most days I'll get up, I'll have my tea, I'll read the story, I'll take some notes, I'll go back, I'll skim it, I'll look at key lines, right? And that's enough prep for most stories. This one, so if I would have read the story without taking notes, it'd probably be like 40 to 45 minutes. But with the amount of notes and Googling that I am doing, an hour and a half later, I'm like, I have 2 pages of notes. I am overwhelmed. And then Gerald had work stuff come up, so that worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had work. Good. Who knew?
All right.
Crazy, man.
I'm going to go into the summary. Again, this story is not for children. I mean, actually, I'm not going to tell you how to raise your children, but by most conventional standards, the way most people raise their kids and we do censorship stuff, this is not for children unless you don't abide by those. All right.
Right. Just a fair warning. You make your own decisions.
Yes.
And it's not for people of a delicate disposition either, really.
No, yes. People of a delicate disposition or even just a moderate disposition.
I mean, I feel like it is for those people.
Yeah.
It's meant for them. I don't know if they want to read it.
Yes. Okay. So, The Lost Performance of the High Priestess of the Temple of Horror.
Anais, you've gone off.
No, I have.
I can't hear you.
I can hear her. I'll translate.
Oh, I can't.
Sounds like a Gerald problem.
She says the Lost Performance.
Sorry.
Am I back for you, Gerald?
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
Everyone went off for a second, so.
All right.
Your little earbuds were blinking.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, the story summary. So, in the story, the narrator, a young woman, is drawn to the Theatre du Grand Guignol in Paris. And I think the story is in the 1920s, and I was thrown for a loop because Granta described the story setting as 19th century Paris and like their meta description, and that's just not possible. Anyway, so at this theater, she sees Paula Maxa perform she's in the role of a wife who plans to murder her husband, but then the husband figures out her plot and uses her own plot to murder her. And then using some special effects on the stage, Max's body decomposes and the narrator is completely enthralled. Soon after this, the narrator's mother dies. The narrator, who's very poor, uses what little money she has to go back to the theater, watch another performance. After the show, she creeps backstage and secures a job as Max's assistant and a theater hand. Maxa takes a keen interest in her, which unnerves one of the other employees, Sabine. The narrator sleeps in a cot backstage. She has no home, and Maxa feeds her. Also, Maxa has an alcohol and opium addiction. Okay. So the relationship between Maxa and the narrator, who Maxa ends up naming Bess, even though that is not her name, becomes slowly intimate in both the emotional and physical sense. Bess eventually meets Marcel, Max's abusive boyfriend. He's overly sexual, cruel, controlling, and Max is afraid to leave him. Marcel does not like Bess at all and is also cruel to her, calls her names, puts her down, puts out a cigarette in her skirt, and so on. So Bess witnesses their violent sex when they do it in the same room in which she is sleeping after Bess starts sleeping in Max's apartment on the floor like a dog. Anyway, this happens more than once. Eventually, Maxa asks Bess if she's ever thought of writing a play. Bess has doubts at first, but Maxa pushes her to do it and has sex with her, goading Bess into writing the most degenerate play ever written. This thrills Maxa. And in the passionate encounter, they fantasize about going to Greece together and leaving Marcel and Paris behind. Bess finally finishes her profane play. In it, Maxa is the queen of humanity before the end of the world, and the audience must decide what her subjects must do with her before the extinction event arrives, which is a comet in the sky. So the actors are asking the audience, what do we do with our final queen? Bess had hoped for an orgy. But instead, the audience demands that they beat the queen and subdue her. The actors start doing that reluctantly at first, but then they do it. And one woman in the audience starts begging everyone to stop, that they're actually hurting Maxa, that this isn't just acting. And then that woman is also consumed by the mob. Clothes are torn from her body. And she's nowhere to be found afterwards. That same night, Bess arrives at Maxa's apartment, and Marcel is there beating her. Maxa begs Bess to help her. Bess intervenes. Marcel hits Bess. Bess hits him in the groin. Marcel runs away. As the women tend to each other, Maxa says that she lit a fire in Marcel that made him go mad, so that he wished to purge her of her sins with the beating. And Maxa also says that she lit a fire in Bess and made Bess into a monster. The next day, Maxa leaves. She's just gone. Bess pieces together some clues, follows Maxa to a small village where they confront each other. Maxa's a little bit more sullen and pathetic than usual. They fight. Bess leaves, never sees Maxa again. Eventually, Bess leaves that entire kind of degenerate life behind, moves to other world cities like London and New York. She finds love in another woman and returns to her real name, Aisha. That's my summary.
Good summary.
All right. Well, I wrote it out because I was like, this is too much. I can't just wing this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Good Lord. Andy, let's start with you, since you were saying that Karina was really excited because she likes this author, and then you read it, and then what happened? How did you react?
Oh, same way you guys reacted. I was just prepared for it. Yeah. No, I just knew what was coming when I started. Man, okay, first off, story was beautiful, huh?
Yes.
Just the language and the choice of words, the little when the words all start with the same letter.
Alliteration.
I kept trying to say illusion. I was like, that's not right.
Illusion is when a lion is a god.
No, illusion is when you evade someone.
No, with an E. I'm saying with an A.
I was saying it. Yeah, because it's funny.
I got it. All right, continue.
Oh.
That's why I'm laughing. Continue.
Right. Yes. You can tell how funny it was. But it was just good words, that just kept flowing at you, right? Mm-hmm. And then, I don't know, and then really jarring sexualized violence. And then beautiful prose. And man, it was just a trip. It was a journey.
Mm-hmm. Gerald?
That's all I got.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Wow.
Gerald?
Good story. Lovely writing. Very good. There were words and nearly all of them were really good, apart from the ones that offended me. And
the C word.
The C word, particularly, the C word is the only word that I do not say. I don't know. I'm not a prude. He tries to proclaim, but
just say you are and be proud. I am. I don't care. I don't feel any shame about being prudish.
Well, I try to be open-minded, and I try to understand what's going on. But this, you see, this a lot of this. So it's a good story for me, spoilt by these bits, and to me, these bits are like what little I've read of transgressive fiction, because and I'm sure, you know, I might be offending people here, I don't know, but to me transgressive fiction is just an excuse to swear lots and come out with the most crude and vile things that your mind can come up with, and then you call it transgressive fiction, because it seems unnecessary. It seems almost as if the writer is saying, "Hey, lesbians," and really aggressively saying, "Look, lesbians, and there's women, and there's lesbians," and I just think, yes, I get it. There's no need to, and I know the whole theatrical performance was it's like a horror show, like several horror shows, and beautifully described for that. There's some really great description of what was going on in the theater. But I just think all this stuff, it's like she's saying, "Oh, I got to do something to shock them now, and just put this in," and to me, it just spoils it.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, I don't. Yeah, we can get into more like the shock value, because I think a lot of that shock is intentional because of the whole Theatre du Grand Guignol, which is a real theater in Paris. So it opened in 1897, closed in 1962. It put on horror shows, and it was so famous that today Grand Guignol now means like specifically a very specific kind of horror, like and it's anything from basically like Shakespeare's time to today, usually in a play format, but it can also be movies like slash fics. So for example, like Sweeney Todd is like a more modern thing that's considered Grand Guignol, or Sleepy Hollow, or like elements of Little Shop of Horrors. And like some people even say like Black Swan even is considered that way. So just like that, very like women screaming and being afflicted and kind of monstrous and shocking and sex and everything like that. It's like a whole genre. And I think she does it with the story. The thing is, when you're doing it with words and not visually, it's almost like if you just say that they have sex and you make it intimate and flowery, the shock value isn't there until you get really graphic about it. Then you get that shock value that you're not getting visually. So that's why I think it was really intentional, specifically because we're exploring this Grand Guignol thing that's going on here. Yeah, you know, I think so. So I guess what I'm saying is your horror and your shock was so intentional. So in a way, it's like hats off to Machado, because that's exactly how she wanted the audience to react, because that's this genre. Which again doesn't mean that I'm like sitting here like, yes, give me more of it. It's not a genre that I particularly love, but I get it. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like, yeah, she was doing it purely for shock value in places. That's the genre.
And I can understand that, and I'm happy to accept that. But for me, that spoils the story, because it happens very suddenly, and it happens very graphically, and very aggressively. And long-time listeners will know I have a real problem with aggression towards women, and so I understood why she was doing it, and I accepted that this is what she was deliberately trying to do. But for my delicate, pale English person, it was just a bit too much.
Yeah, and definitely too much is the genre, right? So like,
yes.
yeah, so yeah, exactly. So, but the thing is, we keep, focusing on the most shocking element of it, which was like the very sexualized violence. But then there's also other parts that aren't necessarily violent or sexual that still have that very visual aspect. And that's what Andy was talking about with the really beautiful prose. Andy, did you like pick out any lines that kind of convey that for you?
Oh gosh, I tried to, but the story really overwhelmed me. Like it was, yeah, what was it, like million words, 10 million, something like that.
Yeah.
No, and like so, at a certain point, you're just rolling along with it, right? It just carries you.
Right. I think one of the earlier examples is when it says it's describing light coming out of the theater, and it's light pouring from the open door throbbed like a bruised thumb. So it was a lot of like body parts, wounds, blood, things like that, even for things that weren't actually physically on a human body. So here you have the lights pouring instead of spilling, which has a different amount of intent behind it a little bit. And also you're comparing something visual like light to a physical sensation that is a little unpleasant, a throbbing bruised thumb. And she did stuff like that throughout. Also, I noticed a lot of oil motifs going on, which was interesting. A lot of oil everywhere. Which just gives it a certain vibe, gives it a certain look, sort of paints a very specific picture in your mind. So yeah, like the hats off to being able to do that with words.
Yeah, there was a bit, God knows where it is, somewhere about a third of the way through, I think. And she said she once saw a woman in the street who'd been knocked about by a lover. So again, the aggression. And she was weeping, but the salt tears were pink. She wiped them from her filthy face and looked them on her hand, the color of a rare diamond. Even my tears bleed, she said, which is, amazing, descriptive, but tight descriptive writing. Really, really good.
Yeah. And also there's a little bit of like a kind of almost strange historical fiction aspect to this, because Paula Maxa is a real actress who was like the most famous one in that theater. So she was active from 1917 to the 1930s, which is again where I'm like, it's probably the 20s because also there's Josephine Baker, who was also active in the 20s and 30s. It could be the 30s, right? It could be the 30s as well. But like the 30s don't capture the imagination quite the way the 20s do, right? So I'm pretty sure it's the 20s. But it has to be 20s or 30s because also in the story they reference the occupation of Paris, which is 1940. Yes. So again, I don't know why Granta said 19th century, but I'm going to go like, nah. So anyway.
When she drifted west to London where she worked as a seamstress, then she says, then the war came, men doing what men did when it was over, and the newspapers were filled with humankind's unspeakable horrors. The Grand Guignol no longer had anything new to show us. So that was the First World War. And as you say, the occupation of Paris came much later than that. So it was that between the wars. So it's sort of pre-First War, World War, something like that.
Well, I think this story takes place between the wars because, again, they go see Josephine Baker, and she's 1920. She was active in the 20s and 30s in Paris. So I think she's between the wars where the story is taking place. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think the unspeakable horrors, both wars had unspeakable horrors, but then with the Second World War, you also have the Holocaust and the nuclear bombs. So now you're ratcheting up the visual horrors that makes the Grand Guignol no longer seem so shocking.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about these characters now that we've gotten past the shocking stuff, which we've done before when things get real shocking, right? Like, let's get this out of the way. Okay.
Yep.
So even though Maxa is based on a real person, obviously the way she's portrayed here is still pretty fictional. Even though the description, I looked up pictures of Maxa and she describes her the way Maxa looked. Like, not actually that beautiful, bit of a pooch in the belly, tiny boobs, but like, but still alluring in a way, really big dark eyes that are like pools. I'm like, yeah, that's like the pictures of her. So what kind of motivates Maxa and what makes her take an interest in Bess? Like, what is Maxa's deal here? Why is she like this?
Is it she's trying to sort of push the boundaries, trying to fight her way out of the sort of mundane and the normality. So she's trying to just shock people more and more, and then find new levels of shock for people. Maybe.
Well, Max is trapped, right? Like, I don't remember exactly where, but she's Maxa says she can't live a life without a man to protect her, right? Which is specifically the kind of life that Aisha is trying to live. So, like, a lot of Max's stuff, her being is kind of false, and then she's lashing out. Right? She can't be the person that maybe she wants to be.
Right, because then she had aspirations to be an actress. Remember that whole story with the paper doll? I think her aspirations to be an actress wasn't necessarily to be the most assassinated woman in the world on stage, where like the sort of exploitative, like she's just repeatedly raped and murdered on stage. I don't think those are the roles she envisioned for herself as a child. Right? There's a way in which she's kind of a tragic character. She had different aspirations as a child. Remember, she had this paper doll that was like a fortune-telling doll that you pull off a paper slip, and then whatever is on the paper, that's your fortune. And she liked that doll, and so the doll said that she should give up basically on her dreams of being an actress. And then that's when she shreds the whole doll and gets really mad. She really wanted this really badly, and I'm pretty sure where she is now is not where she wanted it. And also, she feels trapped, like a little bit in the role that she has been given. This is pretty much all that. There's a line also where she talks about like the only thing people want to see is her beaten and abused, right? And then she's also feels trapped with Marcel. There's that line where Bess is like, "Why don't you leave him?" And she's like, "You don't understand. You're so innocent. You don't understand how it is for me. You don't understand why we need men, even men who abuse us, right?" Like there's this, there's a bit of a tragicness to her, but that tragicness isn't pure victimhood because she's also very predatory. She's also the villain, right? She's you know, like she's a very complicated character in that way. You know, like the whole broken people break people or something like that. Like that sort of like vicious. I'm gesturing. That sort of like vicious like cycle. Like Max is like embodying that. Like she's very broken, and then she goes and I mean, do we all agree she's an extremely corrupting, horrible influence on Bess? Like Bess has some agency in her own decisions, but she is in a very low and emotionally wrought and vulnerable place. She has no money, nowhere to live. Her mother died. She hasn't processed that. She doesn't, you know, and then on top of that, here's this person who like is solving all these things for her, but also manipulating her. So yeah, Max is interesting. She's victim and victimizer, right? As so often is the case. And it's so well drawn. And the thing that's interesting about it is I feel like the story hyper focuses on violence against women and all the forms that it takes. And here is a woman who is abused by all the things that abuse women, other men, society at large. But then also she's abusing yet another woman. She's like paying that forward to make herself feel powerful. It's good. Yeah. Yes. And Max is very well aware of this. She's the one who has the two lines about the way that the world seeks out, three lines really, violence against women. She talks about how the audience only ever wants to see her abused. They don't ever want to see her victorious. She talks about how men are actually like more affected by what's happening in the theater because for them, like abuse and all those horrors is like, isn't something they live with day to day, whereas the women can sort of stomach what's happening on the stage better than the men because that's their lives. That, you know, women exist in that like, it's just the filmy gauze between life and death, but men are on like terra firma, right? There's that whole line. So she knows that. She knows all about that. And she also knows about how even though Marcel is her abuser, she feels like the way that society is structured, she's better off with him than without him. So she's the one who's super aware of it, which is why there's a part of me that's like when the play happens and Bess innocently is like, oh, when you ask the audience what they want, they're going to want an orgy. And Max is like, yeah, sure. Maxa kind of knew. Maxa knows what the audience wants to see from her. She's already said it earlier in the story. And yes, she goes along with it.
Yeah.
Maxa's messed up, man.
A little.
Yeah.
And there's a bit where she's talking about the difference between men and women, and that women are used to bodily fluids coming from them. So the blood, the pretend blood on the stage is he's no longer shocking to them. Yeah, I don't know.
No, you're still not as won over.
No,
I'm glad I
not
took
at
the
all.
break because I would have been so focused on the shock had we come in fresh after reading it and then giving it. Because like all of these things, like knowing she's shocking me for the sake of the genre still didn't matter even when I knew it when I read it the first time. Like I knew that as I read it the first time and I was still just so shocked I couldn't get past my own shock, right? So like you need a break to like
Yeah.
properly discuss it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and I think a second read through, because you know the shock is coming, so it's not such a shock. So that sort of shock value, it's like jump scare in a movie. You know it's coming, so you sort of lose that initial shock value, and that sort of heightened anxiety or emotional peak is reduced somewhat, and then you can look at the rest of it then in a much more even way, rather than just watching, reading this and then bang, this shocking thing happens. So I think it's definitely has to be read at least twice to look behind those things that for some people are shocking. Some people may not be shocked, but you and I certainly were, or all three of us were. No, because Andy wasn't, because Andy was expecting it.
I think it's interesting that once Karina was really excited about this author, you knew shocking stuff was coming.
I didn't know shocking stuff was coming, but I knew it was going to be a challenging story. I knew this wasn't going to be right. Just in general, you have to prepare your mind to be right, challenged, to have things you didn't expect or things you thought not be the things that happen.
Right. No, the story does challenge you, which I like, and like, yeah, I'm here like it's funny also like what shocks you the most, like the mostly consensual. I don't know how much you can say the first time or first couple of times Maxa and Bess had sex, it was consensual, because Bess is constantly being manipulated and has no power here. But the largely consensual sex scenes, like the level of graphic detail shocked me, but I wasn't as like, I don't know, like repulsed in the way that I was anytime Marcel was in a sex scene, right? Like that's when the C word came in. That was Marcel. Also, like they're looking at a peephole, looking at the audience, and Marcel just starts like banging Maxa from behind, but like Bess is right there. All of that was like repulsive to me, right? So like there's also interesting, like, and clever. Like if you're trying to also like, let's zoom out from the story, and if you're also trying to have more like queer characters in your fiction and you're trying to show different things, I think having the on paper heterosexual sex be way more repulsive than the homosexual sex is also clever, right? Like that, like the Maxa and Besties were still shocking in the level of graphic detail, but I wasn't as like horrified, I guess is the way to put it. The horror element wasn't there. I was just like, oh God, but this is a lot. I don't need to be watching this porno right now, but I'm not like, yeah, exactly. I'm not terrified of what's happening right now, which was also kind of clever.
Well, like the flip side on the Bess and Maxa stuff is part of Aisha's happy ending is she ends up, being dommed a little bit by her partner. Like
Yes.
that's her ultimate happy ending, is still like that's what Aisha wanted, it turns out.
Right. But also there's a little bit of like, yeah, part of this might have already been part of what Aisha wants in a partner, is someone who's a little dominant, but like not necessarily like Maxa, who's crazy, but also like, did Maxa see that and that's why she exploited her so artfully? Like, is she just like such a good opportunistic predator, or was Bess shaped a little bit by that experience? Like, did this design, like, oh, this is such a terrible reference given the story, but like early on, have you guys seen Community?
Yes.
When the dean is looking at like guys dressed up as Dalmatians, he's watching a YouTube of it. He goes, "This better not awaken anything in me." Like, did something awaken in Aisha through her experience with Maxa that wasn't there before, or was it already there? Like, we don't know the answer to that.
I don't know, because Aisha was so innocent, so young and innocent, that I don't think she had any idea of what life really was about, and I think she was introduced to life by Maxa, and therefore she thought, well, this is what it's like, and those times, the times between Aisha and Maxa were sort of almost tender compared to the rest of it. And I think you're right, Annie. Is the sort of heterosexual sex was always seemed to be so aggressive and so dismissive and so so unpleasant.
It's worse. It's so much worse. Yeah,
it's
worse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
which is really clever if you're trying to like have a shocking story, but still have some sort of, queer like representation in your characters without tokenism, right? Like you're trying to have like these queer characters without making it feel token. Oh yeah, I love Community, by the way. Live listener to the Community reference for the win. So good. I've watched the whole series twice. So, okay. The other thing that I wanted to mention, but anything else about Bess and Maxa's characters, or
no, it is interesting that to see how that once she realized that once Aisha realized that the Maxa thing was not going to happen, and maybe it was Maxa that knew after she'd got away from Paris, maybe she knew that she was sort of manipulating Aisha and didn't want to do that anymore, and was that sort of dismissive to her when she went to see her in Rouen, and maybe it was Max's sort of story character arc where she was thinking, no, I've done enough to sort of corrupt this young girl's character, and she needs to find her own way now. Maybe she was nice after all.
I don't think so, because later when she goes back into like she's being profiled in an article, she's calling Bess the degenerate one. Like she's like shifting the blame, because remember the night before she leaves, she says, "I lit a fire in you," to Bess. "I made you a monster." So she briefly has this guilt, but then later she exploits everything that had happened there as part of her article, where she's like, "That was the degenerate one, not me," right? So no, I think Max is just like an extremely selfish, self-centered person who has been victimized, but also is a victimizer. Like,
yeah.
And Bess has that dream, the dream that she has that makes her realize she wants to write this really filthy play, is Maxa swallows Bess whole. Maxa is a python who swallows her whole. It's like, oh, that's a good metaphor for what's happening to you, Bess.
Yeah.
So the other thing,
it's interesting that Maxa says when Bess went to see her, and Maxa, I know, and she said, "I just need you to know that you need me, or some part of me." And Maxa says, "Need you for what? I'm not an invert," which is quite sort of, oh, okay, that's interesting phrase. I don't know if that's how it was at the time, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Were you gonna say something, Andy?
No, just in terms of how much Maxa, groomed Bess, like she didn't not, she certainly did, but also like Bess was drawn to that theater in the first place, right? That was the thing that Bess was entranced by from the very beginning.
Yes, but it's one thing. There's a lot of people who enjoy Grand Guignol type of stuff who don't then want to be groomed into an abusive relationship. Like, like you can also see this as pure entertainment without being so. I mean, yeah, I guess what you're saying is the degree to which Bess or Aisha enjoyed it reveals something about her willingness to partake in this.
Right. I mean, when her life fell apart and she had no mother and no place to live, that's where she went. True. That was her.
Yeah.
That was her haven. True.
Yeah. That's a good point. So the last thing that I wanted to bring up, and then my notes are done, is that the play that she did, The Star, where they ask the audience what to do, reminds me a lot of Rhythm Zero, the really, really famous performance art by Marina Abramovich. This was in 1974. There's been Rhythm 1, 2, 3 that have come since then, but that's the one. Are you guys aware of this? Okay. So it's a super famous performance art thing where basically the instructions were there's 72 objects on a table. The people who come and view the performance art can use any of those objects on Marina Abramovich however they desire. She is the object. They're the ones doing things to her or not. And it's 6 hours from, I think it was like a 6 hour duration. Do whatever you want. So here's what an art critic at the time wrote. And like the point of the piece was, what will people do, right? So an art critic at the time wrote, it began tamely. Someone turned her around. Someone thrust her arms into the air. Someone touched her somewhat intimately. The Neapolitan night began to heat up. In the third hour, all her clothes were cut from her with razor blades. In the fourth hour, the same blades began to explore her skin. Her throat was slashed so someone could suck her blood. Various minor sexual assaults were carried out on her body. She was so committed to the piece that she would not have resisted rape or murder. Faced with her abdication of will, with its implied collapse of human psychology, a protective group began to define itself in the audience. Some people were going to protect her, but most did not, right? And when a loaded gun was thrust to Marina's head and her own finger was being worked around the trigger, a fight broke out between the audience factions. Somebody was ready to kill her. And this dude, just in a span of 6 hours, in a span of hours. And there was some group who was like, can we not do this? And there was other people who were like, yeah, wow. Right? And Marina herself later described, was talking about it. She said, what I learned was that if you leave it up to the audience, they can kill you. I felt really violent. They cut up my clothes, stuck rose thorns in my stomach. One person aimed the gun at my head and another took it away. It created an aggressive atmosphere. After exactly 6 hours, as planned, I stood up and started walking toward the audience. Everyone ran away to escape an actual confrontation.
Wow.
Yep. Everyone left immediately. No one spoke to her afterwards.
Wow.
Yeah. So this was 1974, right?
Crikey.
Yeah. And the thing is, these 72 objects, yes, there was a knife. Yes, there was a gun with a bullet in it, but there was also perfume, a feather, mundane everyday objects, ribbon, right? There was other stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it reminded me, I'm pretty sure it was meant to remind me of that. It seems to be a very clear, homage to that. Has a similar
I think there's a whole sort of area of psychology about sort of groupthink and crowd mentality and how the actions of individuals become perverted once they're in a group of like-minded individuals. Excuse me. And I was just saying before we came on air about the things that are happening over here about statues and left demonstrations and right demonstrations, and we had yesterday a lot of right-wing demonstrations and British nationalists and people like that. And there's a bit of video of them walking through Hyde Park, lovely Hyde Park in the centre of London, and some people having a nice little picnic, not on the grass. And this group went over and shouted at them and kicked their stuff over. And you think, why would you do it? There's no reason to do that. They're not doing anything to you, but it's just part of this mob that got so worked up, and drink and drugs came into it too. But it's that whole sort of, it ramps up the emotion and the aggression in the group when there are like-minded people there.
Yeah. Anyway, so anything else we want to add, or are we ready to rate?
Oh, crikey, rating. Oh, blimey.
Yeah. Put a number on it, Gerald.
Jeez.
My number went up because we took off a week. So that was smart.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll go third.
Okay. I'll go first.
That's my number.
I think I'm probably going to give it a 5.5. It's better than just being good, right? It's so smart. This author is so intentional. Everything's so well plotted. It's so beautiful. And even though it shocked me and made me a prude, that's probably a good thing, right? It's probably ultimately, even if I'm uncomfortable, me being uncomfortable is extremely effective writing. So that's good. You made me feel stuff, even if what I felt was, So that's good. Maybe not quite a 6, but a 5.5. Andy?
Yeah, I'm giving it a 5.
Wow.
For the same reason. It was a beautiful story, well done, that made me have reactions. And that's 90% of what you want, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I see that, I understand that, but then I read stories to be entertained, not to be challenged, not to be repulsed. So I don't. I mean, I'm not saying I want nice little airy fairy jumping around a garden stories,
Aisha
but
gets a happy ending, more or less.
Yeah, you don't you try selling it to me. So I think I'm going to give it. I think I'm going to give it a 4 because it was a really good. If without the sort of shock value, to me, gratuitous, aggressive, over sexualized language, I think that would be a good 5.5. But that really just sort of puts me off. It drags me out of the story. It's author intrusion on a massive scale, and I just think no, that's just you're trying too hard to be shocking. I think you could have been shocking without using that sort of language. So yeah, damn it, I'm giving it a 4.
Okay, that's fine. And like I said, I think it is gratuitous intentionally, but even when it's intentional, even if in this story the level of gratuitous I accept, there's been other gratuitous stuff that sometimes just feels exploitative and overdone. So I understand where you're coming from. It's not like I've never felt that way when something was intentionally gratuitous. So yeah. Okay.
But similarly, I know how you two guys feel that making you feel something, making you a bit sort of repulsed or a bit uncomfortable is a good thing too, but not for me. And it's
there's definitely an upper limit. There's been times where I wouldn't. I think somehow Machado, for my personal line, was like she was on that line for me, right? Perfectly. Because there has been times where I felt that something was way too Delira is a perfect example. Like nope, way too gratuitous, and it didn't seem to have a point anymore. But here, it's like the whole thing's Grand Guignol, so okay.
Yeah. And I can see that it fits in with that too, though. That sort of whole storyline and the characters are really good. 4.5. You see, damn you, making me increase my 4.5. It was some really good characterization, and I'm going to stop talking because I'll be going up even more. No, 4.5 is my limit.
Awesome. Okay.
Very good.
So, what are we reading next week?
Next week we're going back to Carve magazine. Stop groaning at the back there. But this is an author who hasn't got an MFA or isn't studying for an MFA. So
okay, we shouldn't hate MFAs.
No, don't hate. No, I keep doing.
Don't tell me who I can hate.
I don't.
We like plenty of stories by authors with MFAs. The problem isn't the MFA. The problem is when something feels like that one MFA voice that we have identified, but not all MFA writers write with that.
And actually, I love MFA stories.
Some people get MFAs and are good writers.
Right.
Yeah, I'd be happy to read MFA stories for the rest of my days because I like them. I think they're really good. They don't have nasty swearing in like this story.
I bet you. Does Carmen Maria Machado have an MFA? I want to know. Now I need to know.
Yeah, you want to know now. Yeah. She may be. But this guy doesn't. It won one of the competition, the Carve magazine competitions in 2007. He has been multiply published, and this is one of his longer short stories. A lot of them are much shorter, and he sometimes goes into sci-fi, and he likes dark fiction and that sort of stuff.
Okay. By the way, Machado not only has an MFA, but she earned it at the Iowa Writers Workshop, which I think we can all say is ground zero of MFA voice for people who decide to go with it. So
wow,
you can break it. It's not a death sentence. I feel like I want to find what episode we go into it and we did our best explaining what we were talking about. So that then, because I remember somebody who has an MFA agreed with us. They were like, oh my God, you're right. There is this trend right now that does this thing. Not that everyone does it, but a fair number of people do.
No, and I think we don't hate MFA authors. We don't hate MFA stories. But sometimes it seems like that in MFA courses, they learn how to write a short story, and it's almost like there's sort of tick boxes, this and that, and they're great. I will repeat, I love those sort of stories. But in on this podcast, we like to try and do something different, like this story.
Right. Okay, so we're going back to Carve. Maybe we'll get a palate cleanser. Maybe it'll be awesome. We like to give you a lot of trouble for Carve, but we also have liked a lot of Carve stories. So
yeah. All
right. Okay. Before you go, shock us with your opinions on the story in the comment section. Also, more people have been joining our Facebook Literary Roadhouse Readers group, and I've seen a few people there and on YouTube say that they want the book club back. This is really a time and money issue. So if you really want the book club back, this is a great time to support us on Patreon. Because if I can pay someone to do sound editing, that is the goal, then I have the time. Awesome. Just being real candid here, guys. If you want the book club, please support us. Just $5 a month goes a long way. Every tiny bit helps. Okay. And as always, share this podcast with the stagehand who probably was your lover's ex-lover. I'm pretty convinced Sabine and Maxa were once lovers because Sabine gets really jealous of Bess. I didn't say this on the show, but this is my story inside the story. All right.
Yeah.
Until next time, read a good story.
Hey.